Welcome, everybody, to NFATalk. Today we have Russ Cooper with us from Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms. And we're going to be talking about the gun ban and how it affects us all in terms of our rights, the Constitution, and where this country is going in terms of, freedom and liberty. So, Russ, thank you for joining us today. I've been a longtime fan of yours. I've been reading all your material. And I encourage everybody else to basically glom onto your website and get onto the feed. The articles are always very enlightening and informative for everybody. And I thank you on behalf of everybody out there. And it's interesting that we have we're a gun organization focused on firearms, of course, but your organization is more of a civil liberties constitutional thing. And this latest gun ban goes way beyond the issue of guns. It goes to, as I said, the core fundamental issues of democracy are here of private property and liberty and civil liberties. So, thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome, Charles. Good to hear that you read my material. That's great. Anybody else who wants to do that, they can get a hold of it at www.canadiancitizens.org. Take a look.
Great. So the last article that you submitted on your website, it was titled "The Exclusive Interview: Decorated Canadian Vet Major Slams Trudeau's Gun Ban. We are edging towards tyranny." And I love this quote that was in there. It said, in a quote, "We are edging closer and closer to despotism, to tyranny, one-party rule." I love that line, and I kind of I really feel that as well too. For people who don't know, my background is Hungarian. My mother and father were chased out of the bloc Soviet area, basically with their own countrymen shooting behind them. So this touches me deeply, and I know this is an important issue, and I know that there's many people out there who have never experienced this kind of fear and tyranny out there and don't understand really what's going on. So maybe you can talk to this a little bit.
Well, it's been ongoing for a while now, and in particular since the 2015 election, I believe. On the heels of that election, Prime Minister Trudeau came out and said that we were a post-national state, one of the first post-national states ever. We had no core values, and that kind of set some alarm bells ringing in my head. And then shortly after that, the government came out with motion M103, Islamophobia. And that particular motion set in train a process that would recognize one religion over all others as having special consideration. Maybe consideration regards criticism of its belief system or its ideologies or its doctrines would be put in a special place where other religions wouldn't have that protection. So that I was a little bit worried about that, and as a result, I started writing. My background is aviation, military aviation, civilian aviation, and security. On the security end, I got wrapped up with the security end of things, aviation, in around 2001, on the heels of 9/11. I was at International Carrier at the time, and I started writing for that carrier, for its pilot organization regarding security and what we needed to look out for our own airborne security when it came to the threat, the terrorist threat. So I became quite familiar with the threat, and now I saw motion M103 coming down the pike, and it entailed a lot of false assumptions, a lot of things that needed to be debated, but weren't being debated. The whole thing was just a slam dunk and going through the parliamentary process, lickety split. So I started writing on the subject, and then some people started to read my writing. Before you knew it, we formed the organization Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms. I started with about 10 folks, up to about 26,000 now. And from there on in, we could see it didn't stop with M103 and its curtailment of speech, potential curtailment of speech. It went into Bill C-16, which was the Gender Identity Expression Bill, which now compelled speech. You had to use certain pronouns when addressing certain people. And so it goes on and on to the point where almost every month now we have a new edict that comes out regarding the control of social media platforms with our digital charter that came out in just a couple of years ago, right after the Christchurch massacre. And now we have new regs coming out or being proposed for misinformation. If you speak out against, if you speak contrary to the narrative, the Wuhan virus narrative, you can be tagged with misinformation because you're not going along with the narrative. You're asking improper questions, and so we see a real tendency for slip sliding into a situation where free speech all of a sudden doesn't become as free as it used to be. And now, unfortunately, with the Wuhan virus reaction and the flatten the curve strategy, we now find ourselves where we are locked down. And for you, Charles, I don't know how old you were when you came over 1956. I guess you were just a baby, I guess. But if you have a couple of years under your belt, you probably see a lot of similarities right now in Canada regards what Hungary was like when you left it. And the situation is not getting better, and that's where I say we're on the train to serfdom. We're on the road to serfdom. Serfdom being the situation we're going to find ourselves in if we keep on this track. So the gun, we call it the gun grab. It came up, and quite frankly, my association, our group doesn't care one way or another about gun control, gun rights. We have people in our organization who are hard over gun control. I just got a letter today. Someone wrote in and said, you shouldn't talk about this. We're a free speech organization, but I shouldn't talk about this because they don't think anybody should have guns in the city of Toronto. I guess this chap is from Toronto. And we have other.
Russ, that's an interesting point that you said there, if I may jump in. And
yeah,
I think that's what's allowing this to happen, right? The government can only do what we allow as a people, right?
Exactly.
And there's lots of people out there. I see this with my kids. They've been indoctrinated through the public school systems where talking about these values and principles of democracy and personal sovereignty, have been nullified or dumbed down or muted. And of course, when the government makes a move on those particular things, they don't even know what they're talking about, and they relinquish them without even having a thought about it.
That's right. And so we see now our organization, we call it C3RF, Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedom, C3RF. We have people on both sides of the argument, but everyone agrees, is the one thing we all agree on, free speech organization, is that everyone should have the opportunity to express their opinion and respectfully disagree and use all the talents they have available to them to make minds change. And so now we see the gun situation arise with basically an order in council, which if you look at an order in council, that's the way of stick handling around the parliamentary process.
Absolutely.
The representative process that makes our country so special and so free.
That's right.
So the use of the OIC, we call the OIC, was another indication that we're headed the wrong way.
Absolutely. And, we've been fighting this fight for decades now. So we are kind of the canary in the mine shaft out there. So we're a little bit more sensitive to, as you were saying, this evolutionary march towards more authoritarian central collectivist control in Parliament and elsewhere as well, too. We've seen how the executive at all branches of government has become more consolidated, more powerful, more dictatorial. So this is nothing new for us. We just happen to be on the front lines, getting the full effect of this. So I'm glad that your organization is aware of this as well too, and I really believe that this is what the public needs to really understand is that if you don't use your rights, I mean they will be eroded and they will be stripped from you, and it's going to be very hard to get those back. It's interesting. I was talking to an MP today from Milton, right? Yeah. And we happened to have a little conversation on a radio station about the gun grab, and he basically just parroted, the party line with all kinds of misinformation and using, the inflammatory buzzwords of military-style assault rifles and all this other, propaganda language. And so in the end, he tried to explain away the rationale for the way he felt and why he rationalizes, the stripping of private property from people. And he said that, well, the polls say that, the people want this, and we were elected basically on those wants. And I retorted back and saying, well, if the mob wants something, that does not mean that you can just strip people willy-nilly of their private property in this case. There are protections for people like me, right, out there, and you don't seem to recognize that. And I challenged them. I'm going, the fact that you're talking like this, in a free country, you don't seem to understand exactly what your role really is. You're supposed to be protecting my rights, not taking them away.
As a priority. The protection of our charter rights, our individual and fundamental freedoms, should be a priority with the government. But what we've seen is that the government has at every turn shown disrespect for those rights and immediately gone into a knee-jerk reaction mode to deal with a situation without even considering the fact that they need to deal with these rights and need to respect them. And the knee-jerk reaction in this particular case was the Nova Scotia massacre of 22 poor folks that resulted in this knee-jerk reaction to stylize military weapons that look like military weapons but don't operate like military weapons to be conflated with military weapons. And it's a little bit insincere and, quite frankly, a little bit politically cynical, I think, for them to use this approach. The other thing that I'm very, very concerned about is this whole prospect of distilling 338 members of parliament down into 32 and have them be our face-to-face representatives in the House of Commons. What about all the folks that don't have the representative in that particular audience? Basically, the whole idea of representative democracy is being shot.
Yes.
And now it's kind of funny, but Blanchette, the leader of the Black Quebecois, he was in Parliament today in the House of Commons. They had an in-face session with supposedly 32 members of Parliament, and he said that he complained that there's only 32 of us required, but and the Bloc had their full contingent, the NDP had their full contingent, and he said the Greens, I think they had their full contingent, but the other two parties didn't even have the respect to have their full contingent in the House at the time. So I imagine that the Liberals and the Conservative parties aren't even fielding their portion of 32. So representative democracy, responsible government is in dire straits. And I think, as you say, it's time for Canadians to wake up, start talking around the water cooler about what's going on, because it might be, the gun associations, the target shooters that are being discriminated against right now.
That's
but
right.
You can bet that they're not going to be the last.
Well, you know what, and that's the slippery slope that we all fear, right? Especially using this, the misuse of OIC. Right now, it's banning of so-called, these rifles that they deem dangerous. But we live in Ontario. We've already gone through the kick at the can here with the Wynne government. So we've had a bittersweet taste of, what the nation is now facing. Here under Wynne, we had, they were bringing in rules about banning wood-burning stoves and, trying to get people to get into electric cars, and which was really funny because they're subsidizing rich people to buy these overpriced electric cars using my tax money, and I couldn't afford to buy it. So this is a very worrisome thing that's coming down the pipe. Just to talk to the what you were saying about the representation part. I've been trying to talk to my MP here, Pam Damoff. She's a Liberal MP, and they were talking about the gun grab before the election, during the election, and after the election. I sent her letters and emails and phoned her, and I even slipped one of our magazines under her door with a little note in it. Please call me. She didn't acknowledge anything. I'm going, our representative democracy is really in peril here. If my own MP won't talk to me, you don't have to agree with me, but at least acknowledge my existence. But finally, in the end, Russ, you know what I had to do? I had to go to my local newspaper, and I talked to the editor, and I said, my MP is not talking to me, right? And this should be alarming to all the people in my constituency or in my electoral district. And he goes, oh, well, you discounted it as being a personal situation between me and Pam, and that was the end of it. And yet, the next day, I got a reply from Pam. So I guess through the grapevine, she got the message that she should be talking to not only Liberals, but also people that, are not of like mind.
Yes, and we should not be afraid to express our opinions and make those opinions known because, as you said, Charles, if you fail to do that, then before you know it, you won't be able to. And we're seeing some crazy stuff coming down the pike. We see, police in Toronto. There was a mother with her baby and a dog, and they were on a park pathway, and they got pulled over because she wasn't moving along quickly enough. I think she got an $880 fine. We have an instance, Newfoundland and Labrador. They've instituted police powers now that allow the police to go into homes, stop traffic, exile people from the province, deport them from the province on the basis of this virus situation. So the government, the politicians, the security forces are assuming an awful lot of power here. And a lot of it is very, very scary and dictatorial. And it's, every day in the paper, there's another story like that that comes along.
We have another talking point here about the balancing away, and I thought this is a really good point that we should probably explore a little bit as well too. And just for people who don't know out there, it's kind of a compromise situation where you get one extreme versus another extreme, and you come to some kind of happy medium in the middle. Now, the NFA is known for no compromise, so this goes against my grain, especially when you're balancing against, truth and justice. I mean, how do you do that? And that's what we've been screaming at the government for, 2 decades now, because there's a lot of standing injustices in the Firearms Act that has criminalized a lot of people out there, and there's harm being done. There's a lot of law-abiding people out there that get entrapped in this, this snare of convoluted regulation and laws that nobody understands, not even the lawyers or the judges, and yet they have to go through it. In the end, they may be found innocent, but they are punished by the justice system with, punitive, legal costs.
Exactly, and that it just goes on and on. You talk about balancing, even outside of this particular this current government for quite a while now, for decades now. The judiciary has been in this going through this whole process of balancing away rights, and they've gone to the extent where a lot of our fundamental freedoms, a lot of our fundamental rights, like freedom of speech, have to be put up against equality rights. And there are a number of new equality rights that are being read into our charter almost on a yearly basis. There's another group that assumes equality rights and victimhood associated with the rights that they're claiming. But these fundamental rights, like speech and religion, are being matched up against these equality rights, and more it seems like those fundamental rights are losing ground, and they're being told to compromise. They're being told to, that they have to make room. And I think this is a slippery slope that started many decades ago, and we're seeing the fruition of that process. I always thought fundamental rights were called fundamental because all other rights, even equality rights, needed them to survive. So chipping away at fundamental rights, as the judiciary has been doing for decades now, has not served Canada well.
No.
So I think maybe we talk about it, CTRF is setting this balance right, taking that pendulum and putting it into the other direction where fundamental rights are gain the priority over all other rights.
And I think a big facilitating factor in this whole degradation in our freedoms and liberties has also been the mainstream media. Yes. We now know, and I've talked to many of them now, there's a lot of, social activists, as they call themselves, that are pretending to be journalists. We gave, our newspapers and these other media outlets their special democratic rights so that they would be the protectors and defenders of the truth. And yet we're finding now that they've cozied up with, with this government that doesn't believe in kind of, telling the truth and, is comfortable with misinformation and not telling things or half-truths. And they just go along with it. They're exacerbating the situation.
Yes, and there's a real alliance there, it seems, between the two, between the government and the mainstream media. But also look at what some of the government policies are that have been coming out in the last couple of years. There's $595 million were pledged by the government to what they called qualified news organizations. Well, those are news organizations, of course, that are going to support the government. So we see money being trading hands here. We also see the government. They had a blue ribbon panel just start of this year come out and make recommendations about how to handle news outlets and news agencies. And their recommendation was to institute a licensing and registration process, where if you wanted to be a news agency in Canada, well, you had to have a license, you had to be registered, and guess who controls that? Well, that's the government. Now we're stepping right into Pravda territory here. That's what we're going with these kinds of initiatives.
Yep.
So it's not surprising that maybe the media is running a bit scared of the government. Maybe the government's got exercised a little bit too much power over the media with our tax dollars, that we should be able to have a say in how they're being spent. And if we took the time to tell the government how they should be spent, maybe we could avoid some of these problems.
Absolutely. And like you said, the media is, sometimes they're even generating these buzzwords, that they're using against the gun community, like the military style assault rifle, and they hoist this in from all over the world, from the States, who have other activists out there who also have the same goal of civil disarmament for their country. And they're using the same language. So, we've seen this happen with these mega media corporations out there. We're talking about the consolidation of the executive power before politically. Well, this has happened now with our news outlets as well too. A lot of the independent news agencies or newspapers in the towns, they are no longer independent. They belong to a big conglomerate that's operated by a board of directors of elite people who basically they're the ones that are setting the narrative. And of course, they're in cahoots with the government because they pay them, and it's easy to control.
And well, look at the example. If you happen to be a news agency that butts heads with the government, then all of a sudden you find yourself being investigated. Ezra Levant from Rebel News, for example, he's under investigation now because he wrote a book during the last election campaign about the Liberal Party. I guess it wasn't too flattering. And so now he's being investigated because they also happen to change the election laws for the 2019 election, where they made it they criminalized anybody speaking out against political parties or politicians. That's a pretty wild way to go when it comes to dealing with your free press. So always round we're really being put in a box here. And now with the Wuhan virus crisis, they have the so-called Emergency Powers Management Act that they can throw at us and start quarantining people, even healthy people. I think this is a historical event here. I think this is the first time in history where nations, countries have actually quarantined healthy people. That's not the way it's supposed to be.
So, Russ, I've got to ask the question for everybody out there. If you don't mind me asking, we're running out of time. So, from your perspective, what should we be doing now to change the course of this juggernaut that's coming our way? What can we do?
I think it's public opinion. That's our approach at C3RF. Is we try to do our best to educate, and through education, we hope that we engage people into starting to talk around the water cooler, starting to ask their members of parliament questions, pointed questions about why are you not in parliament? The House of Commons is too small for social distancing. Okay, then why don't you go out and rent the Ottawa Convention Center? Asking these pointed questions to make sure that they know what you want. And they know that you're serious, because we're not playing with we're playing with fire here, and we're starting to see points basically south of the border where people are not going to put up with this stuff.
No,
maybe Canadians are a little bit more docile, but I can see a lot of people starting to bristle under the boot to their throat. So,
well, we are definitely bristling, Russ. I can tell you, our gun community, for the long time we did our civic duty and bit our lip and hid in our closets with our AR-15s, hoping the boogeyman would go away, and they said they wouldn't take our AR-15s, and yet they came anyway. So we, as a gun community now, we are we have more of a united front than we've ever had before, and that's pretty much what we're recommending out there, is for all those people out there who fear for their civil liberties to get involved. This is the time not to be complacent, but to become political. And there's a lot of EDAs out there now, electoral district associations, that are consolidating new directors. Get on the directorship. You can have access to the MPs there, and definitely get involved with the elections that are coming up. And there's lots of rumors about that coming up in the fall.
I would think that maybe before the fall, because the way the deck has been set up to this point, I mean, there's the government power is not operating like a minority; it's operating like a majority. It's acting like a one-party system. It doesn't really have representative debate, and it doesn't have representative debate, and it is doing basically what it wants to do with all the funds that are made available to it for emergency purposes.
Yes, so we're running out of time now, Russ, so I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming on. If you'd like to say a little something about your organization and where we can contact you, and maybe send money your way and support your cause, as maybe your organization can support ours. So go ahead and talk about your organization.
Okay, it's Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms. If you want to join the conversation, we're very active in it. We're a growing organization. You can get our website at www.canadiancitizens.org. We got a place there you can volunteer, you can donate, you can join the conversation, but we'd love to have you on board and be part of this education program and expressing your opinion.
Very good. Well, on behalf of the NFA, I'd like to thank you, Russ, for joining us today, and keep up the good fight.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks very much for this.
Goodbye, everybody.